Chapter 1 of The Ghost Beyond the Gate by Mildred A. Wirt. The Ghost Beyond the Gate. Chapter 1. Lost on a Hilltop. The little ice boat, with two laughing, shouting girls clinging to it, sped over the frozen surface of the Big Bear River. "Penny, we're going too fast!" screamed Louise Sidell, ducking to protect her face from the biting wind. "Only about 40 an hour!" shrieked her companion gleefully. At the tiller of the icicle, Penelope Parker, in fur-lined parka, sheepskin coat and goggles, looked for all the world like a jolly Eskimo. Always delighting in a new sport, she had built the ice boat herself, spars from a woodlot, the sail from an old tent. "Slow down, Penny!" pleaded her chum. "Can't!" shouted Penny cheerfully. "Oh, we're going into a hike!" As one runner raised off the ice, the boat tilted far over on its side. Louise shrieked with terror and held tight to prevent being thrown out. Penny, hard pressed, sought to avert disaster by a snappy starting of the main sheet. For a space, the boat rushed on, runners roaring. Then, as a sudden puff of wind struck the sail, the steering runner leaped off the ice. Instantly, the icicle went into a spin, from which Penny could not straighten it. "We're going over!" screamed Louise, scrambling to free her feet. The next moment, the boat capsized. Both girls went sliding on their backs across the ice. Penny landed in a snowdrift at the riverbank, her parka awry, goggles hanging on one ear. "Are you hurt, Lou?" she called, jumping to her feet. Louise sprawled on the ice some distance away. Slowly, she pulled herself to a sitting position and rubbed the back of her head. "Maybe this is your idea of fun," she complained. "As for me, give me bronco busting. It would be a mild sport in comparison." Penny chuckled, dusting snow from her clothing. "Why, this is fun, Lou. We have to expect these little upsets while we're learning." The sail of the overturned ice boat was billowing like a parachute. Slipping and sliding, Penny ran to pull it in. "Take the old thing down," urged Louise, hobbling after her. "I've had enough ice boating for this afternoon." "Oh, just one more turn down the river and back," coaxed Penny. "No, we're close to the clubhouse now. If we sail off again, there's no telling where we'll land. Anyway, it's late and it's starting to snow." Penny reluctantly acknowledged that Louise spoke pearls of wisdom. Large, damp snowflakes were drifting down, dotting her red mittens. The wind steadily was stiffening, and cold penetrated her sheepskin coat. "It will be dark within an hour," added Louise. Uneasily, she scanned the leaden sky. "We've been out here all afternoon." "Guess it is time to go home," admitted Penny. "Oh, well, it won't take us long to get the icicle loaded into the car trailer. Lucky we upset so close to the clubhouse." Setting to work with a will, the girls took down the flapping sail. After much tugging and pushing, they righted the boat and pulled it toward the Riverview Yacht Club. Closed for the winter, the building looked cold and forlorn. Penny, however, had left her car in the snowy parking lot, which was convenient to the river. "Wish we could get warm somewhere," Louise said, shivering. "It must be 10 below zero." Pulling the icicle behind them, the girls climbed the slippery riverbank. Snow now swirled in clouds, half curtaining the clubhouse. "I'll get the car and drive it down here," Penny offered, starting toward the parking lot. "No use dragging the boat any further." Abandoning the icicle, Louise went with her chum. A dozen steps took the girls to a windswept corner of the deserted building. Rounding it, they both stopped short, staring. On the snow-banked parking lot, where the car had been left, there now stood only one vehicle, an unpainted two-wheel trailer. "Great fishes!" exclaimed Penny. "Where's the coupe?" "Maybe you forgot to set the brake and it rolled into a ditch." "In that case, the trailer would have gone with it." Her face grim, Penny ran on toward the parking lot. Reaching the trailer, the girls saw by tire tracks in the snow that the car had been detached and driven away. "I knew it! I knew it!" Penny wailed, pounding her mittens together. "The coup's been stolen!" "What's that across the road?" Louise demanded. "It looks like an automobile to me, and in the ditch, too." Taking new hope, Penny went to investigate the little ravine. Through a screen of bare tree branches and bushes, she glimpsed a blur of metal. "It's the car!" she cried jubilantly. "But how did it get across the road?" Penny's elation quickly died. Drawing nearer, she was dismayed to see that the coupe appeared to be lying on its stomach in the ditch. 4 wheels and a spare had been removed. "Stripped of every tire!" she exclaimed. "The thief ran the car out here on the road so we wouldn't see him at work from the river." "What are we going to do?" Louise asked weakly. "We're miles from Riverview. No houses close by. We're half frozen and night is coming on." Penny, her face very long, had no answer. She measured the gasoline tank with a stick. All of the fuel had been siphoned. She lifted the hood, expecting to find vital parts of the engine missing. However, everything appeared to be in place. Seeking protection from the penetrating wind, the girls climbed into the car to discuss the situation. "Can't we just wait here until someone comes along and gives us a lift to town?" suggested Louise. "Yes, but we're on a side road and few cars travel this way during winter." "Then why not go somewhere and telephone?" "The nearest stores are at Cam's Corner, about 2 miles away." Louise gazed thoughtfully at the soft snow which was banking deeper on the windshield of the car. 2 miles and this facing the wind will be a hard hike. Think we ought to try it, Penny?" "I'm sure I don't want to. And we needn't either. Do you remember Salt Sommers?" "The photographer who works on your father's newspaper?" "Yes, he spends his spare time as an airplane spotter. His station is over the hills not more than half a mile from here. Why not tramp over there and ask him to telephone our folks?" "Are you sure you know the way?" "I was there once last summer," Penny said confidently. "One follows a side road through the woods. I'm sure I can find it." "All right," Louise consented, sliding from behind the steering wheel. "If we're going, let's move right along." Stiff with cold, the girls trudged past the clubhouse and on down the road. Snow was falling faster and faster. Several times they paused to wipe their frosted goggles. "This promises to be a man-sized blizzard," Louise observed uneasily. "It's getting dark early, too." Penny nodded, her thoughts on what she would say to her father when she reached home. The car had been fully insured, but even so, it would not be easy to replace 5 stolen tires. Ruefully, she reflected that Mrs. Weems, the kindly housekeeper who had looked after her since her mother's death, had not favored the trip. "Oh, don't take it so hard." Louise tried to cheer her. "Maybe the thief will be caught." "Not a chance of it," Penny responded gloomily. 100 yards farther on, the girls came to another side road which wound upward through the wooded hills. Already there was an ominous dark settling over the valley. Penny paused to take bearings. "I think this is the way," she said doubtfully. "You think?" "Well, I'm pretty sure," Penny amended. "Salt Station is up there on top of one of those hills. If this snow would stop, we'd be able to see the tower from here." Slightly reassured, Louise followed her chum across a wooden bridge and up a narrow, winding road. On either side of the frozen ditches, tall, frosted evergreens provided friendly protection from the stabbing, icy wind. Nevertheless, walking was not easy, for the roadbed bore a shell of treacherous ice. Confident that they would soon come to the airplane listening station, the girls trudged on. Penny, anxious to make the most of the remaining daylight, set a stiff pace. "Shouldn't we be coming to the station?" Louise presently asked. "Surely we've gone more than half a mile." "The post is a little ways off from the road," Penny confessed, peering anxiously at the unbroken line of evergreens. "We should be able to see it." "In this blinding snow? Why, we may have passed the station without knowing it." Well, I don't think so. You're not one bit sure, Penny Parker, Louise accused. We were crazy to start off without being certain of the post's location. We can always go back to the car. I'm nearly frozen now, Louise complained, slapping her mittens together. There's no feeling in one of my hands. Penny paused to wipe the moisture from her goggles. From far down the road came the sound of a laboring motor. She listened hopefully. "A car, Lou!" she cried. "Everything will be all right now. We'll hail it and ask the driver for a lift." Greatly encouraged, the girls waited for the approaching vehicle. They could hear it climbing a steep knoll, then descending. From the sound of the engine, they decided that it must be a truck and that it might round the curve at a fast speed. Worried lest the driver fail to see them, the girls stepped out into the middle of the road. As the truck swerved around the bend, they shouted and waved their arms. The startled driver slammed on brakes, causing the big black truck to slide like a sled. Penny and Louise leaped aside, barely avoiding being struck. As they watched anxiously, the driver recovered control of the machine. He straightened out and brought the truck to a standstill farther up the road. Penny seized her chum's hand. "Come on, Lou, he's going to give us a ride." Before they could reach the truck, the driver lowered the cab window. Thrusting his head through the opening, he bellowed angrily. "What you trying to do? Wreck my truck?" Giving the girls no opportunity to reply, he closed the cab window. Penny saw that the man was intending to drive on. "Wait!" she called frantically. "Please give us a ride! We're lost and half frozen." The man heard, for he flashed an ugly smile. Shifting gears, he drove away. "Of all the shabby tricks, that's the worst," Penny said furiously. "It wasn't our fault his old truck skidded." "But it is our fault we're lost on this road," Louise added. "How are we ever going to find the listening post?" Penny leaned against the leeward side of a giant pine. Already it was so dark she could only see a few feet down the road. There were no houses, no lights, nothing to guide her. "Penny, are we really lost?" Louise demanded, suddenly afraid. "We really, truly are," her chum answered in a quavering voice. "The post must be somewhere near here, but we'll never find it. All we can do is try to get back to the car." End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Ghost Beyond the Gate by Mildred A. Wirt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. At the Listening Post. Penny's courage did not forsake her long. She had suggested to Louise that they return to the stripped car, but she knew that would not solve their problem. Staring up the dark road, she remarked that they must be close to the summit of the hill. "Then why not keep on?" urged Louise. "We set out to find the listening post, so let's do it." They trudged on up the winding road. At intervals, in an attempt to restore circulation to numbed feet, they ran a few steps. Snow fell steadily, whipping and stinging their faces. Gasping, half-winded, they kept doggedly on. Finally, they struggled into a clearing at the top of the hill. Penny wiped her eyes and gazed down through a gap in the white-coated evergreens. A quarter of the way down the slope on the other side appeared a glowing dot of light. "I'm afraid it's only a cabin," she said dubiously. "It can't be the airplane listening post." "Let's go there anyway," advised Louise. "We can warm ourselves and ask how to get back to civilization." They pushed on, still following the road. Downhill walking was much easier, and at intervals they were encouraged by a glimpse of the light. Then, rounding a bend of the road, the girls came to an artistic, newly constructed iron fence, banked heavily with snow. The fence led to a high gate, and behind the gate loomed a dark, sprawling house with double chimneys. "The place is deserted," Louise observed in disappointment. "What became of the light we've been following?" "It must be further on. This house looks as if it's been closed for the winter." Penny went to the gate and rattled a heavy chain which held it in place. Peering through the palings, she could see an unshoveled driveway which curved gracefully to a pillared porch. The spacious grounds were dotted with evergreens and shrubs, so layered with snow that they resembled scraggly ghosts. "Wonder who owns this place?" speculated Louise. "Don't know," Penny answered, turning away. "In fact, I don't ever recall having seen it before." Her words carried special significance to Louise. "If you've never seen this house before, then we're on a strange road. Penny, we'll never find the listening post." "I'm beginning to suspect it myself," Penny admitted grimly. "But we must keep plodding on. That light can't be far ahead." Turning their backs upon the gloomy estate, they again braved the penetrating wind. Soon Louise lost her footing and fell. She remained in a dispirited little heap until Penny pulled her off the ice. "Let's keep going, Lou," she urged. "It won't be long now." Louise allowed Penny to pull her along. They rounded a curve in the road, and there, miraculously, the lighted cabin rose before them. "At last," exulted Louise. "The promised land." Staggering up a shoveled path, they pounded on the cabin door. An old man who held a kerosene lamp responded promptly. "Well, come in, come in," he invited heartily. "Why, you look half frozen." "Looks aren't deceitful either," Penny laughed shakily. As the girls went into the warm room, a little whirlpool of wind and snow danced ahead of them. Quickly, the old man closed the door. He made places for Penny and Louise at the stove and tossed in a heavy stick of wood. "Bad night to be out," he commented cheerfully. Penny agreed that it was. "We're lost," she volunteered, stripping off her wet mittens. "At least we can't find the airplane listening post." "Why, it's just a piece further on," the old man replied. "The tower's right hard to see in this storm." While they thawed out, the girls explained that they had been forced to abandon their car at the Riverview Yacht Club. The old man, whose name was Henry Hamill, listened with deep sympathy to their tale of woe. "I'll hitch up my horses and take you to Riverview in the sled," he offered. "That is, unless you'd rather stop at the listening tower." "It would save you a long trip," Penny returned politely. "If Salt Sommers is on duty, I'm sure he'll take us to our homes." In the end, it was decided that old Henry should drive the girls as far as the post. Then, if arrangements could not be made with the photographer, he would keep on to Riverview. Warm at last, Penny and Louise declared that they were ready to start. Old Henry brought the sled to the door and the team was soon racing down the icy road. Above the jingle of bells arose occasional squeals of laughter, for the young passengers enjoyed every minute of the unexpected ride. Presently, old Henry pulled up at the side of the road. "There's the tower," he said, pointing to a 2-story wooden observatory rising above the evergreens. "I'll wait for you till you find out if your friend's here." The girls thanked the old man for his kindly help and scrambled from the sled. They were sure their troubles were over, for they could see Salt Sommers seated at a table in the lighted tower. A flight of steps led to a narrow catwalk which ran around 3 sides of the glass enclosed house. Before Penny and Louise could hammer on the door, Salt opened it. "Well, see what the storm blew in!" the young man exclaimed. "I didn't expect to see you girls pop in on a night like this." "Salt, how soon will you be driving to Riverview?" Penny asked breathlessly. "About 20 minutes, as soon as my relief shows up." "May we ride with you?" "Why, sure." Penny called down from the catwalk to tell old Henry he need not wait. With a friendly wave of his hand, the cabin owner drove away. The girls then followed Salt into the drafty tower room. Curiously, they gazed at their surroundings. In the center of the room stood a small coal stove. Above it, a tacked sign admonished, "Keep this fire going." There was a table, 2 chairs, and a telephone. Also, a round clock which indicated 7:40. Before Penny and Louise could explain why they had come, Salt held up a warning finger. "Listen!" he exclaimed. "Wasn't that a plane?" He ran out on the catwalk, letting in an icy blast of wind. In a moment he came back, grinning sheepishly. "A passenger airplane is due through here about this time. Sometimes I listen for it so hard I imagine the sound of the engine." "The job must get tiresome at times," Penny ventured, making herself comfortable by the glowing stove. "Oh, it does, but I'm glad to serve my trick. What brings you girls here on such a wild night?" The story was quickly told. Nevertheless, by the time Penny had telephoned to Mrs. Weems, it was after 8 o'clock. Footsteps pounded on the stairway. An elderly man, his hat and overcoat encrusted with snow, swept into the room. "My relief," said Salt, presenting Nate Adams to the girls. "I'm free to shove off now." "Hope you can start your car," commented the newcomer. "It's mighty cold and the temperature is still dropping." Salt's battered coupe was parked not far from the tower. Snow blanketed the windshield. He wiped it away and, after several attempts, started the engine. "Think I'd better stop at the first garage and have more alcohol put in the radiator. No use in taking a chance." Salt followed the same road over which the girls had trudged an hour earlier. In passing the estate not far from old Henry's cabin, Penny peered with renewed interest at the big house. In the blinding snowstorm she could not be sure, but she thought a light gleamed from an upstairs window. "Salt," she inquired, "who lives in that place?" "Can't tell you," he replied without turning his head. "Does anyone live there now?" "Haven't seen anyone since I took over as observer at the tower. Nate Adams tells me the estate has a private airfield. No planes have taken off or landed while I've been on duty." "I thought I saw a light just now in an upstairs window." "Probably a reflection from the car headlights," Salt answered carelessly. The car passed old Henry's cabin and crept on until it came to a crossroad. Several buildings were clustered on either side of the main highway. "Guess I'll stop at Mattie's garage," Salt said. As he pulled up on a gravel runway, a masculine looking woman came to the door of the car. She was in her mid-30s and wore a man's coat much too large for her. The girls guessed, and correctly, that she was Mattie Williams, owner of the garage and filling station. "How many will you have?" she asked Salt, briskly clearing the windshield of snow. The photographer replied that he did not require gasoline, but wanted at least a quart of alcohol. "Drive into the garage," the woman instructed, opening a pair of double doors. "I'll have Sam take care of it." As the car rolled into the building, Mattie shouted loudly to a stoop-shouldered man who was busy in the rear office. "Hey, Sam! Look after this customer, will you?" Sam Burkholder slouched over to the car and began to unscrew the radiator cap. Penny and Louise assumed that the man must be Mattie's husband, but a remark to that effect was corrected by Salt. "Sam is Mattie's partner," he explained in an undertone. "It's hard to tell which of them is the boss of this place." Losing interest in the pair, Penny and Louise climbed out of the coupe. They had noticed a cafe next door and thought they might go there for a cup of hot coffee. "Go ahead," Salt encouraged. "I'll stay here until the job is finished and join you." As the girls let themselves out the garage door, a truck pulled up in front of the cafe. They would have given it no more than a casual glance had not the driver alighted. He was a short, ruddy-faced man with a missing front tooth which made his facial expression rather grotesque. Without glancing at the girls, he entered the restaurant. "That man!" exclaimed Louise. "Haven't we seen him somewhere?" "We have indeed," agreed Penny grimly. "He's the same driver who refused us a ride. Let's march in there and give him a piece of our minds." End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Ghost Beyond the Gate by Mildred Wirt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3. An Unpleasant Driver. From outside the lighted cafe, the girls could see the truck driver slouched at one of the counter stools. "I'm willing to go inside," said Louise, "but why start a fuss? After all, I suppose he had a right to refuse us a ride." "We might have frozen to death." "Well, he probably didn't realize we were lost." "I wish I had your charitable disposition," Penny said with a sniff. "He heard me shout and he drove away just to be mean." "Anyway, let's forget it." Louise took Penny's elbow, steering her toward the cafe. The girls had been friends since grade school days. They made an excellent pair, for Louise exerted a subduing effect upon her impulsive chum. The only daughter of Anthony Parker, publisher of the Star, Penny had a talent for innocently getting into trouble. Inactivity bored her. When nothing more exciting offered, she frequently tried her hand at writing stories for her father's newspaper. Such truly important yarns as The Vanishing Houseboat, The Wishing Well, Behind the Green Door, and The Clock Strikes 13 had rolled from her typewriter. Penny thoroughly enjoyed reportorial work, but best of all she loved to take an active part in the adventures she recounted. "Now remember," Louise warned her, "not a word to that truck driver. We'll just snub him." "Oh, all right, I'll try to behave myself." Grinning, Penny allowed herself to be guided toward the restaurant. Near the doorway they came to the parked truck and noticed that it was loaded with large wooden boxes. "War equipment," commented Penny. "How do you know?" "Why, the boxes are unmarked except by numerals. Haven't you noticed, Lou, that's the way machines and materials are transported to and from factories? It's done so no one can tell what's inside." Penny opened the door and they went into the warm, smoky cafe. As they seated themselves at a table, the driver glanced toward them, but seemingly without recognition. "How about a date tonight, baby?" he asked the waitress. Without replying, the girl slapped a menu card on the counter in front of him. "High toned, ain't you?" he chuckled. "What will it be?" the waitress demanded impatiently. "How about a nice smile, baby?" Turning away, the waitress started to serve another customer. "Get me a cup of coffee and 2 sinkers," the driver hurled after her. "And make it snappy too. I'm in a hurry." Once the coffee and doughnuts had been set before him, the man was in no haste to consume them. He read a newspaper and fed $1.50 into a pinball machine. Penny and Louise ordered coffee. Knowing that Salt might be waiting for them, they swallowed the brew scalding hot and arose to leave. At the cashier's desk, Penny paid the bill. Upon impulse, she quietly asked the man behind the cash register if he knew the driver. "Fellow by the name of Hank Bigelow," he answered. Before Penny could ask another question, a police patrol car screeched to a standstill just outside the restaurant. The cafe owner turned to stare, as did the driver. "What are those cops coming here for?" Hank Bigelow demanded.
"How should I know?"
retorted the cafe owner.
"Maybe they want to ask you a few questions about that cargo you carry."
"What do you mean by that crack?" the driver asked harshly. As the cashier shrugged and did not reply, Hank allowed the matter to pass. Although he remained at the counter, he kept watching the police car through the window. The brief interchange between cafe owner and driver had interested Penny. To delay her departure, she bought a candy bar and began to unwrap it. Only one policeman had alighted from the car. Tramping into the cafe, he pounded his hands together and sought the warmth of a radiator. "Mind if I have a little of your heat?" he asked the cafe owner.
"Help yourself."
Penny had been watching Hank Bigelow. A moment before, the man had sat tense and nervous at the counter. Now he seemed completely relaxed and at ease as he sipped his coffee. "Hello, Hank," the policeman greeted him. "Didn't see you at first. How's the trucking business?" "Okay," the driver growled. "Working me day and night." The casual conversation disappointed Penny. Her first thought had been that Hank Bigelow feared a police investigation. Seemingly, she had indulged in wishful thinking. Having no further reason for remaining in the cafe, the girls stepped out into the storm.
"A pity that policeman wasn't looking for Hank Bigelow," Penny muttered.
"I thought for a minute he was." responded Louise, stooping to fasten the buckle of her heavy overshoe. At least Hank acted peculiar. You heard what the cashier said to him. About the cargo he carried? Yes, nodded Penny. What do you suppose he meant? Don't you think it was just intended as a joke? It didn't seem that way to me, Lou. Hank took offense at that remark. He was as nervous as a cat, too. Penny stared curiously at the big truck, which was parked not far from the police car. I wonder what can be in those big boxes, Lou. A few minutes ago you said they contained tools or defense plant products. That was only my guess. I assumed it from the lack of marking on the boxes. Penny paused beside the big truck. Pressing her face close to an opening between the slats, she counted 10 large crates, all the same size and shape. Lou, maybe this isn't defense plant merchandise, she speculated. Maybe it's some sort of contraband. Penny's words trailed off. Someone had touched her on the shoulder. Whirling around, she found the same policeman who, a moment before, had entered the cafe. "What do you think you're doing?" he inquired. "Oh, why, just looking," stammered Penny. "We were wondering what's inside these boxes." "Machinery," replied the policeman. "Now skidoo! Behave yourselves or I'll have to speak to your parents." End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of The Ghost Beyond the Gate by Mildred A. Wirt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4 Stolen Tires. "We're very sorry," Louise apologized to the policeman. "We didn't suppose it would do any harm to look at the outside of the boxes." Run along," the officer said impatiently. Penny was tempted to make a rather pointed remark, but Louise pulled her away. "Never argue with a policeman," she whispered. "You always lose." "We weren't doing any harm," Penny scowled. "What does he think we are, a couple of female spies?" Entering the garage, the girls saw that the car had been serviced. Salt could be seen inside the little glass enclosed office. "I'm waiting for Sam Burkholder," he explained as they joined him. "He took care of the radiator, then disappeared." Penny and Louise loitered about the office, reading the evening newspaper. After a little delay, Mattie Williams appeared. "Can you give me my bill?" Salt requested. "We're in a hurry to get to Riverview." "I thought Sam was looking after you," Mattie replied, making out the slip. The bill settled, Salt backed the car from the garage. Penny noticed that Hank Bigelow's truck no longer stood in front of the cafe. The police car also had gone. She would have thought no more of it had not Louise at that moment exclaimed: "Penny, that truck is parked at the rear of the garage now, and they're unloading the boxes." Penny twisted around to see for herself. It was true that the big truck had been backed up close to the rear entrance of the garage. Through the blinding snow she could just see Hank Bigelow and Sam Burkholder carrying one of the boxes into the building. "Well, that's funny!" she exclaimed. "Those crates can't contain defense machinery or materials. Otherwise, Hank wouldn't be delivering them here." "What crates?" inquired Salt, shifting gears. Penny told him what had transpired in the cafe and revealed that she and Louise had been rebuked by the policeman. Salt, occupied with driving, did not consider the incident in any way significant. "You know how some cops are," he commented carelessly. The car went into a wild skid, and Salt thereafter devoted his attention strictly to driving. Without further mishap, the party arrived safely at Riverview. Louise alighted at her own home, and then Salt took Penny to the Parker residence. "Won't you come in for a cup of hot chocolate?" she invited. "Thanks, not tonight," Salt replied. "I'm dead tired. Think I'll hit the hay early." Only one light burned in the living room as Penny stomped in out of the cold. Mrs. Weems, the plump housekeeper who had served the Parkers for many years, sat beside the hearth sewing. "I'm glad you're home at last," she exclaimed, getting up quickly. "You've no idea how worried I've been."
But Louise and I telephoned. I couldn't hear you very well. I barely was able to make out that something had happened to your car. A major catastrophe, Mrs. Weems. Every tire was stolen."
While the housekeeper bombarded her with questions, Penny stripped off overshoes and heavy outer clothing. Pools of water began to form on the rug. "Take everything out to the kitchen," Mrs. Weems said hastily. "Have you had your supper?"
"Not even a nibble, and I'm starving."
As Mrs. Weems began to prepare a hot meal, Penny perched herself on the kitchen table, alternately talking and chewing on a sugared bun.
"If you ever were lost in an Arctic blizzard, you've got a good picture of what Louise and I endured," she narrated grandly. "Oh, it was awful."
"Losing 5 practically new tires is a mere detail in comparison."
"It's nothing less than a tragedy. I was thinking maybe you ought to break the sad news to Dad."
"Indeed not. You'll have to tell him yourself. However, he's attending a meeting and won't be home until 11."
"That's much too late for me," Penny said quickly. "I'll see him in the morning. And I do hope you cooperate by giving him a dandy breakfast."
"Just see to it that you don't oversleep," suggested the housekeeper dryly. Penny consumed an enormous supper and then slipped off to bed. She did not hear her father come home a few hours later. In the morning, when Mrs. Weems called her, it seemed advisable to take a long time in dressing. Her father had gone by the time she strolled downstairs.
"Did you tell Dad?"
she asked the housekeeper hopefully. "You knew I would," chided Mrs. Weems. "Your father expects to see you at his office at 9 o'clock."
"How'd he take the blow?"
"Naturally, one couldn't expect him to be pleased." With a deep sigh, Penny sat down to breakfast. Worry over the coming interview did not interfere with her usual excellent appetite. She had orange juice, 2 slices of toast, 4 pancakes, and then, somewhat concerned lest she lose her slim figure, debated whether to ask for another helping. "The batter's all gone," Mrs. Weems settled the matter. "Do stop dawdling and get on to the office. Your father should not be kept waiting." With anything but enthusiasm, Penny took herself to the plant of the Riverview Star. Passing through the busy newsroom where reporters pounded at their typewriters, she entered her father's private office.
"Hello, Dad," she greeted him with forced cheerfulness. "Mrs. Weems said you wanted to see me."
"So you lost 5 tires last night?" the editor barked. Mr. Parker was a lean, keen-eyed man of early middle age, known throughout the state as a fearless newspaperman. At the moment, Penny decided that fearful would prove a more descriptive term.
"Well, Dad, it was this way," she began meekly.
"Never mind a long-winded explanation," he interrupted, smiling. "It wasn't your fault. The car was stripped." Penny wondered if she had heard correctly. "Your tires weren't the only ones stolen yesterday," Mr. Parker resumed. "A 6 other thefts were reported. In fact, I've known for several weeks that a professional gang of tire thieves has been operating in Riverview."
"Oh, Dad, you're a peach!" Penny cried, making a dive for him. "I'm going to give you a great big kiss."
"You are not," Mr. Parker grinned, pushing her away. "Try to remember, this is an office." Penny resigned herself to a chair. Questioned by her father, she gave a straightforward account of how the car had been stripped at the yacht club grounds. "The tire gang is getting bolder every day," Mr. Parker exclaimed wrathfully. "But we'll soon put a stop to their little game."
"How, Dad?"
Mr. Parker hesitated and then said: "I can trust you, can't I, Penny?"
"Of course."
"Then I'll tell you this in confidence. For weeks, Jerry Livingston, our Star reporter, has been working on the case. He's rounded up a lot of evidence against the outfit."
"Then we'll have a chance to get those tires back?"
"I'm not thinking about that," Mr. Parker said impatiently. "Jerry's gathered enough evidence to smash the entire gang. It will be as big a story as the Star ever published."
"When are you breaking it, Dad?"
"Perhaps tomorrow. Depends on the state prosecutor."
"John Gilmore? What does he have to do with it?"
"This story is loaded with dynamite, Penny.
If we spread it over our front page before police have a chance to act, the guilty parties are apt to make a getaway." "That's so," nodded Penny. "There's another reason I wanted to consult the prosecutor before I use the story," Mr. Parker resumed. "Some of the men involved " A tap sounded on the door. Without completing what he started to say, the editor called, "Come in." Jerry Livingston entered the office. He was a good-looking young man, alert and clean cut. Smiling at Penny, he slapped a folded paper on Mr. Parker's desk. "Here's my story on the tire thefts, Chief," he said. "As far as I'm concerned, this winds up the case." "You've done fine work, Jerry," Mr. Parker praised. "Thanks to your work, we ought to clean out the gang." "I hope so, Chief. Guess you have all the proofs needed to back up the story?" "All the evidence is locked in my safe. I have an appointment scheduled with the prosecutor. If he okays the story, we'll publish it tomorrow. By the way, Jerry, what are your plans?" "Well, I have a couple of weeks before I go into the Army Air Corps." "Then treat yourself to a vacation, starting right now," said Mr. Parker. "Can you use it?" "Can I?" grinned Jerry. "Know what I'll do? I'll hop the noon train and head for the Canadian wilds on a hunting trip." Mr. Parker wrote out a check which he presented to the young man. "We'll be sorry to lose you, Jerry," he said regretfully. "But remember, a job will always be waiting when you return." The reporter shook hands with Mr. Parker and Penny, then left the office. "We'll miss Jerry around here," the editor remarked. Penny nodded. She and Jerry had shared many an adventure together, and he was one of her truest friends. The office would not seem the same without him. "My appointment with the prosecutor is at 10:30, said Mr. Parker briskly. "I'll gather my papers and be on my way." The editor placed Jerry's signed story in a leather portfolio. Next, he went to the safe and fumbled with the dial. "Want me to open it for you?" Penny asked after he had tried several times. Without waiting for a reply, she stooped down, twisted the dial a few times, and opened the heavy door. "Young lady, how did you learn the combination?" Mr. Parker demanded in chagrin. "Oh, the numbers are written on the underside of your desk," Penny grinned. "Not a very good place either. You must trust your office help." "Fortunately, my reporters aren't quite as observing as a certain daughter," Mr. Parker retorted grimly. The editor removed a fat brown envelope from one of the drawers of the safe. Glancing at the papers it contained, he added them to the contents of the portfolio. Then he locked the safe. "How about letting me see that story?" Penny asked. Mr. Parker smiled but shook his head. "Only two persons know the facts of the case, Jerry and myself." "Let's make it a trio." "It will be, after I've talked to the prosecutor. I've got to step right along too, or I'll be late." "But Dad "
"You'll read the story in tomorrow's Star, I hope," her father laughed. Picking up the portfolio, he started for the door. "Just keep your impatience until I get back, and please keep those slippery little fingers away from my safe." End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of The Ghost Beyond the Gate by Mildred A. Wirt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5 An Important Interview. After her father had gone, Penny remained in the private office. Eager to be off, Mr. Parker had neglected to make any arrangements concerning the stripped car at the Riverview Yacht Club. "Oh, bother," she thought impatiently. "Now I must wait here until he comes back to learn what I'm to do. The car should be hauled home." Penny wrote a letter on the typewriter. As she searched for a stamp, the door swung open. A slightly bald, angular man with hard brown eyes paused on the threshold. The man was Harley Shearer, an assistant editor, next in authority to Mr. DeWitt. Of the entire Star staff, he was the only person Penny actively disliked. "Oh, good morning, Miss Parker. he said with elaborate courtesy.
Your father isn't here?
No, he went away for a few minutes.
And you were taking care of the office in his absence.
Mr. Scherr smiled. Even so, to Penny's sensitive ears, the words had an insolent ring. "I'm merely waiting for him to return," she answered briefly. "I came to find out what to do about the car."
Oh, yes, I heard that all of your tires were stolen last night.
Mr. Scherr's lips twitched.
Too bad.
"I may get them back again. Dad says—" Penny checked herself, remembering that the information given her by her father was to be kept secret.
Yes?"
encouraged the assistant editor. "Perhaps the police will catch the thieves," she completed.
I shouldn't count on it if I were you, Miss Parker. Black markets have flourished in this city for months. Nothing's been done to stop it."
"Just what do you mean by a black market, Mr. Scherr?"
Illegal trading in various scarce commodities. Tires, either stolen or hijacked, are sold by the crooks to so-called honest dealers who serve the public. It's now a big-time business."
"What does Dad think about it?"
"Well, now, I couldn't really tell you. Your father doesn't discuss his editorial policy with me. If he did, I'd warn him to lay off all those tire theft stories."
Penny gazed quickly at the assistant editor, wondering how much he knew of her father's plan. "Dad usually prints all the news," she said. "Why should he soft pedal the tire stories?"
"For his health's sake."
"I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mr. Scherr." The assistant editor had closed the door behind him. Warming to his subject, he replied:
"The men who have muscled into the tire theft racket are ugly lads without scruples. If your dad stupidly insists upon trying to smash the outfit, he may not wake up some morning."
The suggestion that her father might be ruthlessly done away with shocked Penny. And a canny corner of her mind demanded to know how Mr. Scherr could be so well informed. She was quite certain her father had not taken him into his confidence. "Dad is no coward," she said proudly.
"Oh, no one ever questioned his bravery, Miss Parker. Your father is courageous to the point of rashness, but if he prints an expose story about the tire theft gang, it's apt to prove the most foolish act of his life."
"How do you know he intends to do such a thing?" The question, sharply put, surprised Mr. Scherr.
"Oh, I don't," he denied hastily. "I merely heard the rumor around the office."
Penny made no reply. As the silence became noticeable, the assistant editor murmured that he would return to see Mr. Parker later, and left the office. Penny glared at the man's retreating back. Even more intensely than before, she disliked Harley Scherr. "The old sneak cat," she thought. "I'll bet a cent he's been listening at the door or prying in Dad's papers. I'm sure no rumors have been circulating around the office." The telephone rang. Automatically, Penny took down the receiver.
"Mr. Parker?"
inquired a masculine voice. "He's not here now. This is his daughter speaking. May I take a message?"
"No message," said the purring voice. "Mr. Parker may hear from me later."
"Who is this, please?" asked Penny quickly. There was no answer, only the click of a receiver being hung on its hook. The incident, although trifling, annoyed Penny. Getting up from the desk, she walked to the window. Mr. Scherr's intimation had alarmed her, and now the telephone call added to her uneasiness. "Probably the man who telephoned is well known to Dad," she tried to assure herself. "I'm just imagining that his voice sounded sinister." Feeling the need of an occupation, Penny wandered out into the editorial room. She chatted with the society editor, and for a time watched the world news reports coming in on the noisy teletype machines. "Hey, need a job?" inquired Editor DeWitt at the slot of the circular copy desk. "How about writing a few headlines for me?" "No, thanks," Penny declined. "I'm just waiting for Dad. He should be back any minute now." It was 11:45 by the office clock. Never had time seemed to pass so slowly. As Penny debated whether or not to wait any longer, there was a sudden stir in the room. Glancing toward the outside door, she saw that Jerry Livingston, suitcase in hand, had entered. Immediately, reporters and editors left their desks to shake his hand. "Jerry, you're the best reporter this paper ever had," Mr. DeWitt told him warmly. "We sure hate to see you go." "Oh, I'll be back," the reporter answered. "You can bet on that." Penny crossed the room to say goodbye. Jerry, surprisingly, tucked her arm through his. "Come along and see me off at the train," he invited, pulling her along. "Not doing anything special, are you?" "Just waiting for Dad." "Then come on," Jerry grinned. "I've got a lot to say to you." However, once in the taxi, speeding toward the railroad station, the reporter scarcely spoke. He reached out and captured her hand. "I'm gonna miss you, you little twerp," he sighed. "No telling when I'll get back to the Star. Maybe—" "Now don't try to work on my sympathies," laughed Penny, although a lump came in her throat. "Oh, Jerry." "At your command. Just break down and confess how desolate you'll be without me." The railroad station was close by, and Penny had only a moment to talk. "Riverview will be a blank without you," she admitted. "But it's that tire theft story I want to ask you about. Did you ever tell anyone that Dad is planning to expose the gang?" "Of course not." "I knew you wouldn't give out any information," Penny said in relief. "But somehow Harley Schur has learned about it."
"Sure, that egg? How could he have found out?"
"I'd like to know myself. He hinted that something dreadful might happen to Dad if the story is printed." Jerry patted Penny's hand.
"Don't give it a thought, kid," he said. "Schur does a lot of wild talking. Probably whatever he said to you was pure bluff. He doesn't know a thing."
The arrival of the cab at the station put an end to the conversation. Jerry paid the driver and hustled Penny inside. He barely had time to purchase a ticket before the train was called.
"Well, goodbye," Jerry said, squeezing her hand.
"Have a good time in Canada," Penny replied. "And bring me a nice bear rug."
"Sure, I'll catch him with my bare hands," Jerry rejoined, making a feeble attempt at a joke.
The train began to move. The reporter swung himself aboard the last Pullman. As he waved from the steps, Penny realized that she had forgotten to ask for his Canadian address. Soon the train was only a blur down the frosty tracks. Penny climbed a steep ramp to the street. She felt lonesome and, for some reason, discouraged. "First I lose my car wheels and now it's Jerry," she reflected sadly. "What a week!" Penny scarcely knew whether to go home or to the Star office. As she debated the matter, her ears were assaulted by the shrill scream of a siren. "A fire," thought Penny. An ambulance rushed past. It raced to the end of the short street and pulled up. "Probably an accident," amended Penny. Curious to know what had happened, she began to run. At the end of the street, a large crowd had gathered. A car with a smashed fender and damaged front grill work had piled against a street lamp. "What happened?" Penny asked a man who stood beside her.
"Two cars in a smash up," he answered. "Didn't see the accident myself."
"But what about the other automobile?" asked Penny. She pushed through the gathering crowd to the curb. Broken glass was scattered over the pavement. Ambulance men were searching the wreckage of the car which had struck the lamp post. The other automobile, apparently, had driven away. Suddenly, Penny's gaze riveted on the rear license plate of the smashed car. In horror, she read the number: P61910. "Dad's car!" she whispered. "He's been hurt." End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Ghost Beyond the Gate by Mildred A. Wirt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6. Front Page News. Never in her life had Penny been more frightened. Breaking away from the group of people at the curb, she ran to the parked ambulance. A glance into the interior assured her that Mr. Parker had not been placed inside on a stretcher.
"Where is he?" she asked wildly. "Where's my father?"
A white-garbed ambulance attendant turned to stare at her.
"That's my father's car!" Penny cried, pointing to the battered sedan. "Tell me, was he badly hurt?"
The attendant tried to be kind.
"We don't know, miss. Someone put in a call for us. Said we were to pick up an injured man. Evidently he was taken to a hospital before we could get here." "That's what happened,"
contributed a small boy who stood close by.
"A woman drove by in an auto. She offered to take the man to the hospital and he went with her."
"A tall, lean man in a gray suit?" Penny asked quickly.
"Yeah, he had a leather case in his hand." "Then it was my father!" Penny cried. "How badly was he hurt?" "Oh, he could walk all right,"
the boy replied.
"He seemed kind of dazed though."
Greatly relieved to learn that her father had escaped serious injury, Penny sought more information. The boy who had witnessed the accident told her that the car that caused the smash-up was a blue sedan.
"Two men were in it," he revealed. "They started to go around your father's car and crowded him toward the curb. Next thing I saw, he plowed into the lamp post."
"The other car didn't stop?"
"I'll say it didn't. You should have seen him go."
"Didn't you notice the license plate number?" Penny asked hopefully. The boy shook his head. Having learned all she could from him, Penny questioned other persons. Only one woman in the crowd was able to provide additional information. Her eyewitness account differed slightly from the boy's, but she confirmed that a middle-aged woman in a black coupe had taken the accident victim to a hospital.
"Which hospital?"
asked Penny. The woman could not tell her. She did say, however, that the accident victim seemingly had suffered only minor scratches. A police car drove up. Penny, frantic to find her father, did not wish to be delayed by questions. Without revealing who she was to members of the investigation squad, she hailed a taxi. Mercy Hospital was only a few blocks away. It seemed reasonable that her father would be taken there for treatment. A few minutes later, standing anxiously at the information desk of that institution, she learned that Mr. Parker had not been admitted as a patient. The nurse in charge, noting the girl's agitation, kindly offered to telephone other hospitals. After 6 calls, she reported that she was unable to trace the accident victim.
"Are you sure that your father sought hospital treatment?"
she asked Penny.
"Perhaps not. Dad wasn't badly hurt according to witnesses. He may have gone elsewhere."
Thanking the nurse for her help, Penny taxied swiftly home. Mrs. Weems, in an old coat and a turban, was pouring salt on the icy sidewalk in front of the house. From the look on her face, it was evident she had not heard the news.
"Mrs. Weems, Dad's been hurt!"
Penny cried, leaping from the cab.
"In an auto accident."
"My land!" the housekeeper gasped, and allowed the bag of salt to fall from her gloved hand. "How bad is it?"
"I think he was more stunned than anything else, but I've not been able to learn where he was taken. He didn't telephone here?"
"Not unless it's been since I've been outdoors." Picking up the bag of salt, Mrs. Weems followed Penny into the house. Without removing coat or hat, the girl dialed the Star office. Editor DeWitt answered.
"Has Dad arrived there?"
Penny asked abruptly.
No, he hasn't. Anything wrong?"
Tersely, Penny revealed what had occurred. The news shocked the editor, for he bore Mr. Parker a genuine affection.
"Now, don't you worry," he tried to cheer her. "Your father can't be badly hurt or he never would have walked away from that accident. Just sit tight. Our reporters will locate him for you."
During the next hour, Penny and Mrs. Weems remained near the telephone. Each moment they waited, their anxiety increased. Mr. DeWitt did not phone. There was no word from the police station. They refused to believe that Mr. Parker had been seriously injured, yet it seemed strange he could not be found.
"It's not like him to allow anyone to worry," declared the housekeeper. "I simply can't understand why he doesn't call to relieve our minds."
Just then the telephone bell jingled. Penny snatched the receiver from its hook.
"DeWitt speaking,"
said the familiar voice of the editor.
"Any news?" Penny asked quickly. "Did you find Dad?"
"So far we haven't," the editor confessed. "I've personally called the police station, every hospital and private nursing home in Riverview."
"Dad may have gone to a doctor's office for treatment."
"I thought of that," replied DeWitt. "We've checked all the likely ones."
"What could have become of him?" Penny asked desperately. "Mrs. Weems and I are dreadfully worried."
"Oh, he'll show up any minute," comforted Mr. DeWitt.
"Probably doesn't realize anyone's looking for him."
Penny asked the editor if he'd learned the identity of the hit skip driver.
"No one took down the license number of the car," Mr. DeWitt returned regretfully. "Our reporters are still working on the story though."
"The story,"
murmured Penny faintly. For the first time it occurred to her that her father's accident and subsequent disappearance would be regarded as front page news.
"I don't expect to run an account of the accident till we've talked to your father," DeWitt said hastily. "Now don't worry about anything. I'll let you know the minute I have any news."
Penny hung up the receiver and reported the conversation to Mrs. Weems. A clock on the mantel chimed 1:30, reminding the housekeeper that lunch had not been prepared.
"No food for me," pleaded Penny. "I don't feel like eating." "I've rather lost my own appetite," confessed the housekeeper. "However, it's foolish of us to worry. Your father must be safe. No doubt he had an appointment."
Penny's face brightened.
"Why, of course!" she exclaimed. "Don't know why I've been so dumb. Dad may still be in conference with Prosecutor Gilmore. I'll call there."
Darting to the telephone, she waited patiently until she was connected with the state prosecutor's office. The lawyer himself talked to her. "Why, no, Mr. Parker hasn't been here," he replied to her eager inquiry. "I expected him at 10:30. Then he telephoned that he'd been delayed and would see me at 11:30. He failed to keep that appointment also." The information sent Penny's hopes glimmering. She explained about the accident and listened to the prosecutor's expressions of sympathy. Replacing the receiver, she turned once more to Mrs. Weems.
"I'm more worried than ever now," she quavered. "Dad didn't keep his appointment with Prosecutor Gilmore, and it was a vitally important one. We'll hear from him soon. Perhaps we won't."
Penny took a quick turn across the room.
"Why, such a thing to say! What do you mean, Penny?" "Dad has enemies. Harley Sher told me today that if any attempt was made to expose a certain gang of thieves, it would mean real trouble."
"But your father has had no connection with such persons."
"He and Jerry worked on a case together," Penny explained. "Today, at the time of the accident, Dad carried a briefcase with all the evidence in it." "Even so, I fail to see " "According to the report, Dad's car was practically forced off the road," Penny added excitedly. "I think that auto crash was deliberately engineered. Don't you understand, Mrs. Weems? He's fallen into the clutches of his enemies."
"Now, Penny," soothed the housekeeper. "I'm sure we're making far too much of the accident. We'll soon hear from your father."
"You're saying that to comfort me, Mrs. Weems. Something dreadful has happened. I can feel it."
Penny ceased pacing the floor and went to the hall closet for her hat and coat. "Where are you going?" asked the housekeeper, her eyes troubled.
"To the newspaper office. If word comes, I want to be there to get it the very first minute."
Mrs. Weems started to protest, then changed her mind. She merely said,
Telephone me the moment you have any news."
A brisk walk to the Star office did much to restore Penny's sagging courage. As she entered the newsroom, brushing snow from her coat, she saw a group of reporters gathered around Mr. DeWitt's desk. "News of Dad!" she thought, her pulse pounding. Glimpsing Penny, the men at the desk began to scatter. They gazed at her in such a kind, sympathetic manner that she became frightened again. "What is it, Mr. DeWitt?" she asked the editor. "Has Dad been found?" He shook his head. "But you must have had some news," she insisted, her gaze on a folded paper which he held. "Please don't hide anything from me."
"Very well," DeWitt responded quietly. "We found this letter in your father's wastebasket."
Penny took the paper. Silently she read the message which had been typed in capital letters. "Mr. Parker," it warned, "this is to advise you to lay off the tire theft stories in your newspaper. Unless you change your policy, you may wake up in a ditch." End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Ghost Beyond the Gate by Mildred A. Wirt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. Questions Without Answers.
"I'd rather not have shown that note to you,"
Mr. DeWitt said quietly.
"We found it only a moment ago."
"How did it get in Dad's wastebasket?" Penny asked. "Do you suppose he threw it there himself?"
"Well, that's my guess. Your father never paid any attention to unsigned letters."
Penny reread the threatening note, trying not to show how much it disturbed her. "I wonder if it came by mail," she remarked.
"We don't know," DeWitt replied. "There was no envelope in the basket."
"Dad never mentioned such a note to me," Penny resumed, frowning. "Probably thought I'd worry about it. This makes the situation look bad, doesn't it, Mr. DeWitt?" The editor weighed his words carefully before he spoke.
"It doesn't prove that your father was waylaid by enemies, Penny. Not at all. According to reports, Mr. Parker was involved in an ordinary automobile accident and left the scene of his own free will."
"With a woman who drove a black car?"
"Yes, according to eyewitnesses, she offered to take him to a hospital for treatment."
"What became of that woman?" demanded Penny. "Can't the police find her?"
"Not so far."
Before Penny could say more, Harley Schur came to the desk, spreading a dummy sheet for the editor to inspect. "Here's the front page layout," he explained. "For the banner, we'll give 'em 'Anthony Parker mysteriously disappears,' and beneath it, a double column story. I dug a good picture out of the morgue, the one with Parker dedicating the Riverview Orphans' Home." DeWitt frowned as he studied the layout.
"Parker wouldn't like this, sure. It's too sensational. Bust that banner and cut the story down to the bare facts."
"But this is a big story."
"I'm expecting Mr. Parker to walk in here any minute," retorted DeWitt. "A disappearance spread would make the Star look silly."
"Mr. Parker's not going to show up,"
Schur refuted, his eyes blazing.
"I say we should play the story for all it's worth."
"I'm sure Dad would hate sensationalism," Penny said, siding with Mr. DeWitt. The assistant editor turned to glare at her. Although he made no reply, she read anger and dislike in his flashing eyes.
"Cut the story down,"
DeWitt ordered curtly.
"And try to find a more suitable picture of Mr. Parker."
Schur swept the dummy sheet from the desk, crumpling it in his hand. As he started for the morgue where the pictures were filed, he muttered to himself.
"Don't know what's gotten into that fellow lately," DeWitt sighed.
The editor sat down rather heavily, and Penny noticed that he looked tired and pale. For 15 years he had been closely associated with Mr. Parker, regarding his chief with deep affection. "Do you feel well, Mr. DeWitt?" she inquired.
"Not so hot,"
he admitted, reaching for a pencil.
Lately, I've been having a little pain in my side. It's nothing though. Just getting old, that's all."
Why not take the day off, Mr. DeWitt? You've been working too hard.
"Now, wouldn't that just be a fine time to go home?" the editor barked. "Hard work agrees with me."
Reminded that she was keeping Mr. DeWitt from his duties, Penny soon left the Star office. Debating a moment, she walked to the nearby police station. There she was courteously received by Chief Jalman, a personal friend of her father's. "We'll find Mr. Parker," he assured her confidently. "His description has been broadcast over the radio. We've instructed all our men to be on the watch for him." Penny broached the possibility that her father had been waylaid by enemies. "Facts fail to support such a theory," replied Chief Jalman. "It's my opinion your father will show up any hour, wondering what the fuss is all about." Penny left the police station rather cheered. Almost without thinking, she chose a route which led toward the scene of the accident. Reaching the familiar street, she noted that her father's battered car had been towed away. All broken glass had been swept from the pavement. "When I was here before, I should have questioned more people," she thought. "It never occurred to me then that Dad would fail to show up." Noticing a candy store which fronted the street close to the bent lamp post, Penny went inside. A friendly looking woman with gray hair came to serve her. "I'm not a customer," Penny explained. She added that her father had been injured in the car accident and that she was seeking information.
"I've already been questioned by police detectives,"
replied the owner of the candy shop.
I'm afraid I can't tell you very much."
"Did you witness the accident?"
"Oh, yes, I saw it. But it happened so fast I wasn't sure whose fault it was."
"You didn't happen to take down the license number of the blue hit skip car?"
"Was it blue?" the woman inquired. "Now, I told the police maroon."
"My information came from a small boy, so he may have been mistaken. Did you notice the woman who offered my father a ride?"
"Oh, yes, she was about my age, around 40.
"Well dressed?"
Rather plainly, I would say, but she drove a fine late model car."
"Would you consider her a woman of means?"
Judging from the car, yes."
Penny asked many more questions, trying to gain an accurate picture of the woman who had aided her father. She was somewhat reassured when the candy shop owner insisted that Mr. Parker had entered the car of his own free will. "Did he seem dazed by the accident?" she asked thoughtfully.
"Well, yes, he did. I saw your father get into the car, sort of holding his head. Then he asked the woman to stop at the curb."
"Why was that?"
"He'd forgotten something. A leather carrying case. At any rate, he returned to his own auto for it. Then he drove away with the woman."
As puzzled as ever, Penny went out into the street once more. The weather had turned colder, but she scarcely felt the blast of icy wind which whipped her face. It was silly to worry, she told herself sternly. Why, all the facts supported Chief Jalman's belief that her father would soon return home. Mrs. Weems was confident he would be found safe. So was Mr. DeWitt. After all, only 5 hours had elapsed since the accident. A disappearance couldn't be considered serious in such a short period. But try as she might, Penny could not free her mind of grave misgivings. She could not forget the mysterious phone call, the threatening letter, and Harley Shear's cocksure opinion that her father would not be found. She stood disconsolate, gazing into the whirling snowstorm. At the end of the street, the railroad station loomed as a dark blur, reminding her of Jerry. If only he hadn't gone away! Jerry was the one person who might help her, and she knew of no way to reach him. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of The Ghost Beyond the Gate by Mildred A. Wirt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8 A few changes. Next morning, Penny, red-eyed because she had slept little, walked slowly toward the Star office. Throughout the long night there had been no word from Mr. Parker. At every street corner, newsboys shouted the latest headlines: that the publisher had been missing for nearly 24 hours. Even the Star carried a black, ugly banner across its front page. Penny bought a copy, reading with displeasure the story of Mr. Parker's disappearance.
I can't understand why DeWitt let this go through, she thought. If Dad were here, he'd certainly hate it.
Entering the lobby of the Star building, Penny pressed the elevator button. A long time elapsed before the cage descended. To her surprise, she saw that it was operated not by Mose Johnson, the colored man, but by the janitor.
"Sorry to keep you waiting, Miss Penny," the man apologized. "I'm not much good at operating this contraption."
"Where is Mose this morning, Charley?"
"Fired."
Penny could not hide her amazement. The old colored man had been employed 10 years at the Star plant. Although not strictly efficient, Mose's habits were good, and Mr. Parker had taken an affectionate interest in him.
"It's a shame if you ask me," the janitor added.
"What happened, Charley? Who discharged him?"
"That guy Sure."
"Harley Sure? But he has no authority."
"An editor can fire and hire. I think he was just trying out his stuff on poor old Mose."
"During my father's absence, Mr. DeWitt is in full charge here," Penny said emphatically.
DeWitt was in charge, but they hauled him off to the hospital last night with a bad pain in his tummy. Seems he had an appendicitis attack. The doctor rushed him off and didn't even wait until morning to operate."
The news stunned Penny. She murmured that she hoped Mr. DeWitt was doing well.
"Reckon he is," agreed the janitor. "We all chipped in and sent him some flowers. Roses. Mose gave 50 cents too."
Penny's mind came back to the problem of the colored man.
"So Mr. Sure discharged him," she commented. "I wonder why."
The janitor pressed a button and the cage moved slowly upward.
"Mose was due on at midnight," he explained. "He didn't get here until after 2 o'clock."
"Didn't he have a reason for being so late?"
The cage stopped with a jerk.
"Sure, Mose had a pip this time. Something about being detained by a ghost. Sure didn't go for it at all. Swelled up like a poisoned pup and fired Mose on the spot."
"I'm sorry," Penny replied. "Dad liked Mose a lot."
"Any news from your father?"
Penny shook her head. As far as possible, she was determined to keep her troubles to herself. Turning to leave the cage, she inquired:
"Where is Mose now? At home?"
"He's gone down to the boiler room, sitting by the furnace. Says he's afraid to go home for fear his old lady will give him the works."
"Will you please ask Mose to wait there for me?" Penny requested. "I want to talk to him before he leaves the building."
"I'll be glad to tell him," the janitor said. Hesitating, he added: "If you got any influence with Sure, you might speak a good word for me."
"Why for you?" smiled Penny. "Surely your job is safe."
"I don't know about that," the janitor responded gloomily. "This morning when Sure was coming up in the elevator, he says to me, 'Charley, there's going to be a few changes made around here. I'm going to cut out all the old useless timber.' Then he looks at me kind of funny like too. You know I passed my 68th birthday last August."
"Now don't start worrying, Charley," Penny cheered him. "We couldn't run this building without you."
Deeply troubled, she tramped down the hall to the newsroom. Reporters were in a fever of activity, pounding out their stories. Copy boys had a nervous, tense expression as they ran to and fro on their errands. Harley Sure, however, was not in evidence. "Big shot has sealed himself in your father's office," informed one of the copy desk men in a muted voice. "Guess you heard about DeWitt." Penny nodded. "The great genius has taken over, and how.
This place is operating on an efficiency plus basis now. Why, he's got me so cockeyed I compose poetry."
Penny crossed to her father's office, tapping on the frosted glass door.
"Who is it?"
demanded Sher, his voice loud and unpleasant. Penny spoke her name. In a moment the door opened and the editor bowed and smiled. As if she were a guest of honor, he motioned her to a seat.
"We're doing everything we can to trace your father," he said. "So far we've had no luck, and the police admit they are baffled. I can't express to you how sorry I am."
To Penny's ears, the words were words only, lacking sincerity. Determining to waste no time, she spoke of DeWitt's sudden illness.
"Oh, yes, he'll be off duty for at least a month," replied Mr. Sher. "Naturally, in his absence, I have assumed charge. We put out a real paper this morning."
"I saw the front page." Penny longed to say that the story about her father had displeased her. However, she knew it would do no good. The account, once printed, could not be recalled. Far better, she reasoned, to let the matter pass. "I hear Mose Johnson has been discharged," she remarked.
"Yes, we had to let him go."
Mr. Sher opened his desk drawer, helping himself to one of Mr. Parker's cigars.
"Mose is indolent, irresponsible, a drag on the payroll."
"My father always liked him."
"Yes, he did seem to favor the old coot,"
agreed Sher with a shrug.
"Well, thank you for stopping in, Miss Parker. If we have any encouraging news, I'll see that you are notified at once."
Well aware that she had been dismissed, Penny left the office. Sher's attitude angered her. He had made her feel unwelcome in her own father's newspaper plant. As she closed the door behind her, she realized that nearly every eye in the apparently busy newsroom had focused upon her. Deliberately, she composed herself. Acting undisturbed, she swept past the rows of desks to a rear stairway leading to the basement. The janitor had delivered her message to Mose Johnson. She found the old colored man curled up, fast asleep on a crate by the warm stove. Penny touched Mose on the arm. He straightened up as suddenly as if someone had set off a firecracker.
"Oh, Miss Penny!" he beamed. "I's sure surprised just seeing you down here in this dumpy furnace room. But I thanks you just the same for waking me up out of that ghost dream."
"Were you having a ghost dream?" echoed Penny.
"Yes, miss. You see, I was dreaming about that same ghost I saw last night on the way to work."
Penny, fully aware that Mose was directing the conversation where he wished it to go, hid a smile. "I heard about that, Mose," she commented. "It must have been quite a lively ghost to make you 2 hours late."
"It sure was a lively ghost,"
Mose confirmed, bobbing his woolly head.
"Why, it walked around just like a live person."
"Aren't you being a bit superstitious, Mose?"
"Deedy not, miss. You is superstitious when you sees a ghost dat ain't dar. But when you sees one dat is dar, you ain't superstitious. You is just plain scared."
"Suppose you tell me about it," Penny invited.
"Well, Miss Penny, it was like this," began the old colored man. "At 11:30 I starts off for work same as always. I picks up my lunch box de old lady packed for me, and I scoots off toward the bus stop to get to 11:45. But I never get dar. When I was goin' down that road, runnin' past the old Harrison place, I seen the ghost."
"The Harrison place," interrupted Penny. "Where is that?"
"You know the road that winds up Craig Hill? It's out toward the boat club."
"You don't mean that big estate house with the fence surrounding it?"
"That's the place. Well, I seed this here ghost a cavortin' around behind the big iron gate that goes into the old Harrison place. The ghost never sees me, but I gets a good close up of him. He was dressed in white, and he was carryin' his own tombstone round in his arms just like it don't weigh nothin'."
"Oh, Mose!" protested Penny.
And then what happened? Did the ghost disappear?"
"No, miss," grinned the colored man. "But I did. I turns tail and runs fast as a man half my age could go, and I never stops for nothin' till I gets back to my own place. When I tells my old lady what was goin' on, she say, 'Mose, you sees white ghost 'cause you been a drinkin' some mo' of dat white eye. It's 12 o'clock dis minute and you's missed de last bus. Now you start walkin', and if you is fired, don't never darken dat door no more.'"
Old Mose drew a deep sigh.
"And dat's jest what happened, Miss Penny. I ain't got no job and no more home dan a rabbit. I sure bubblin' over with trouble. And it all come from seein' dat ghost you says I didn't see."
"I'm sure you thought you saw one," replied Penny. "If you promise to attend strictly to your duties hereafter, I'll ask Mr. Scher to reinstate you on the payroll."
Old Mose brightened.
"I sure enough will," he said jubilantly. "I won't have no more truck with dat ghost. No, sir."
To face Mr. Scher once more was a most unpleasant ordeal for Penny. Nevertheless, she sought his office, apologizing for the intrusion.
"I am busy," the editor said pointedly. "What is it you want?"
Penny explained that she had talked with Mose Johnson and was convinced that his offense would never be repeated.
"I want you to put him back on his old job," she requested. "Impossible."
"Why do you take that attitude?" inquired Penny, stiffening for an argument.
"Dad always liked Mose." "One can't mix sentiment with business. I have a job to do here, and I intend to do it efficiently."
"Dad will probably show up before another day."
"I don't like to dash your hopes," said Mr. Scher. "We've tried to spare your feelings. Perhaps your father will be found, but you know I tried to warn him he was inviting trouble when he mixed with the tire theft gang."
"So you believe Dad has fallen into the clutches of those men?"
"I do."
"What makes you think so? Have you any evidence?"
"Not a scrap."
"And how did you learn Dad intended to expose the higher ups?"
"I don't mind telling you. I heard him talking to Jerry Livingston about it."
"Oh, I see."
"We're getting nowhere with this business," Mr. Scher said impatiently. "I really am busy."
"Will you reinstate Mose?" Penny asked, reverting to the original subject.
"I've already given my answer."
"After all, this is my father's paper," Penny said, trying to control her voice. "It's not a corporation. Only Dad's money is invested here."
"So what?"
"As a personal favor, I ask you to reinstate Mose."
"You're making an issue of it?"
"Call it that if you like."
Mr. Scher's dark eyes blazed. He slammed a paperweight across the desk and it dropped to the floor with a hard thud. "Very well," he said stiffly. "We'll restore your pet to the payroll."
"Thank you, Mr. Scher."
"But get this, Miss Parker," the editor completed. "We may as well have an understanding. While your father is absent, I'm in full charge here. In the future, I'll have no interference from you or any other person."
End of chapter 8.